Hello everyone, we're going to start today with just diagramming a couple of sentences to review some things. The first sentence is, she brought her and me some delicious cookies. If you do not already have a sheet of notebook paper, go ahead and get a sheet of notebook paper out and get out your binder and turn to your grammar notes section so that you'll have access to any of the handouts or notes that you might need. Particularly for these sentences, you're going to want that handout that says, let's see, I believe it says diagramming, it says conjunctions and compound situations at the top. Conjunctions and compound situations. You're going to want to have that handy, either where you can flip to it easily in your binder or out of your binder so that you can use it to help you diagram a couple of these sentences. So, she brought her and me some delicious cookies. Go ahead and pause the video and diagram that sentence. Okay, let's go over this one and just correct it, yours as we go. So the first step is to identify any prepositional phrases. That's always the first step. There are no prepositions in this sentence, so we can move on. And we're going to go ahead and find our predicate and our subject and our predicate. So to find the predicate, look first for any action verbs. If there aren't any action verbs, look for, and then if and any helping verbs that may go with that. And then if there aren't any action verbs, look for any linking verbs, any forms of be, am, is, are, was, were, be, being, been. See if you see any of those in the sentence. I see an action, brought. Who brought? She brought. So she is a subject. And like we talked about in class a little bit, if you prefer to find the subject first, if that's easier for you, then that's fine too. She brought. So brought is an action verb. She is a pronoun. Now, we found an action verb. We're always going to look and see if we have a direct object. You will not always have a direct object after an action verb. Just if that confuses you, don't overanalyze that. Just think about it for a minute. I run. That's a complete sentence. Run is an action verb. There's not a direct object. There will not always be a direct object. But look for one and see if there is one. Brought what? Brought what? What was brought? Cookies. So for a direct object, I'm going to draw a line to my baseline and I'm going to write cookies as my direct object. I'm going to put D-O under the line and it's a noun. Now if you did not get that, if you did not get that cookies was the direct object, then you're going to need to stop and ask your parents to maybe help you figure out again or help you review how to find a direct object. You find your action verb and then you say what? Brought what? Cookies. So what I want you to do if you're missing any of these is to make sure that you understand it. Don't just stop and correct your paper and go on. At this point, if you're missing any of these, there's something that you're not understanding on these diagrams, and you can either come to me and ask for help or you can ask your parents for help. But don't just make your corrections and write it down, because this is going to keep coming up and keep coming up. So really work, not that you're going to be perfect and never miss any, I'm not saying that, but if you don't understand it when you miss it, really be honest with yourself and ask yourself if you understand it. If you don't, ask for help because it's going to keep coming up. All right, so she brought what? Cookies. Now, when you find a direct object, see if you happen to have an indirect object. You won't always. It could just be she brought cookies. But you have to ask to see if you have an indirect object. So you say your direct object and then to or for whom. Brought cookies to or for whom? To or for her and me. So her and me, we have a compound indirect object. So just to review, to find the indirect object, you say to or for whom about your direct object. Brought cookies to or for whom. And remember, to diagram that indirect object, we do it like we would a prepositional phrase, except we're missing the preposition because it's basically what an indirect object is. But in this case, we have a compound indirect object. We have her and me. So we have her and we have me, and both of those are the indirect objects. So I'm going to write I-O under both of those. So if I were to say what is the indirect object on that sentence, you would say her, me. And is just the conjunction joining it. So I'm going to write and on that line there, and I'm going to put a, ran out of room, so I'll put it there, a C over it for conjunction. Okay, so those are our main parts of the sentence, and now we can add in any modifiers. Some is an adjective modifying cookies, and delicious is an adjective modifying cookies. Now let's read our sentence and see if we got it all. She brought her and me some delicious cookies. Now, the reason I threw her and me into this sentence is just to introduce you a little bit again to why we are studying this in the first place. And the reason is for usage. So, how we use our language. So, we know that we need to say her and me here, not she or I. I want you to think for a minute if you can figure out why. Why don't we say she and I some delicious cookies? Because some people assume that I is always correct, no matter what, and it's not. There are times when it's correct to use me and times when it's correct to use I. And I want you to see if you can figure out why we say me here. The reason is, remember when we studied our pronouns, we talked about our subject pronouns and our object pronouns. And we have she is the subject pronoun, her is an object pronoun. I is a subject pronoun, me is an object pronoun. He is a subject pronoun, him is an object pronoun. Remember how we talked about that? Well, the subject pronouns we use as a subject of the sentence, or a predicate nominative, because those take the place of the subject. The object pronouns we use as direct objects, indirect objects, and objects of the preposition. So if it's a direct object or indirect object or object of the preposition, we have to use object pronouns, and this is an indirect object, so that's why we say her and me. We'll go over that more later, but I just wanted to talk about that a little bit with you. All right, so there's your sentence. Go ahead and make any corrections. And again, if there's something you don't understand, stop to see if you can figure it out. And if not, then you need to ask for help. If you miss a direct object, then you need to ask, see if your parent can help you. There's a handout on how to find the direct object. See if your parent can help you, or go back and review your handout and review how to find your direct object. Or email me, or call me, or ask me on Friday, and I'll help you. All right, number 2, the next sentence that we're going to diagram is she and I are happy. That's a pretty easy sentence there. She and I are happy. Pause the video and diagram that sentence. Okay, let's talk about this one. The first thing you do is look for any prepositional phrases. There are none in this sentence, so we can move on to find our subject and our predicate. Our simple predicate is are, and our simple subject is she and I. It's a compound subject, so remember, I'm going to do this thing here like this. Review your handout on compound situations if you need to review how to do this. She is a simple subject. It's a pronoun. I is a simple subject, and it's a pronoun. And is simply the conjunction that is joining them. And is not the simple subject. She, I. Okay, are is what kind of verb? Are. It's a form of be. Am, is, are, was, were, be, being, been. If a form of be is your main verb, it's going to be a linking verb. Okay, so that tells us that we are definitely going to have a predicate adjective or a predicate nominative. Now, remember, an action verb will not always have something else on this line up here. An action verb won't always have a direct object. But a linking verb will always have a predicate adjective or a predicate nominative, because that is the purpose of a linking verb. That is what a linking verb does. A linking verb connects a word in the predicate that goes back and either renames, can replace, or describe the subject. So happy, let's see what happy does. And remember, I'm going to draw a line slanting back. Happy. Does happy rename she and I? Does it tell who we are? No. It describes. It's an adjective. To be a predicate nominative, it has to be a noun or a pronoun, because it has to be able to replace the subject, which is a noun or a pronoun. But happy is an adjective, so it is our predicate adjective. Now let's make sure that we diagrammed the entire sentence. She and I are happy. Now, what if the sentence said, she and I are the teachers? If the sentence said, she and I are the teachers, in that case, is teachers going to be a predicate adjective or a predicate nominative? Is teachers renaming the subject, telling who the subject is, or describing? The difference is teachers a noun or a pronoun or an adjective? Teachers is a noun, right? It's the predicate nominative. It's renaming she and I. So I'm going to write teachers here for this one, and I would put a noun, and I would put PN for predicate nominative, and then the for adjective. So she and I are the teachers. If you didn't write that, that's okay. I just want you to see, I want you to understand this one. She and I are the teachers. We could switch that around and say the teachers are she and I. That's how we know that it's a predicate nominative. So just to recap, if you have an action verb, sometimes you'll have a direct object, not always. But if you have a linking verb, you will always have a predicate adjective or a predicate nominative, because that is the purpose of a linking verb. And if you're still a little confused sometimes about how to diagram those compound situations, just use your handout as we come across those. I'm not terribly concerned with that. I'm just more concerned that you understand what the parts of the sentence are, because we are absolutely going to need that later. So if you're having trouble understanding what a direct object is, or what a predicate nominative or a predicate adjective is, you need to ask for help on that. If you still are a little unsure about how to diagram compound situations, don't worry about that. We'll just keep working on that. Okay, so now I want to talk to you for just a minute about the types of sentences. I know that this is not easy, And we're just going to keep revisiting this, keep looping back around to it. But I'm going to talk to you about a couple of things right now about the types of sentences. So we talked about simple sentences. You don't need to write this down, just listen. You have the handout that outlines that I gave you in class that says what are the different types of sentences, gives a definition and some examples. That handout will really come in handy. So a simple sentence is just the same thing as an independent clause. Can stand alone. I ate the cookies. An independent clause, a simple sentence. All right, and then a compound sentence is simply two independent clauses or two sentences, right, joined by a coordinating conjunction, joined by for, and, nor, but, or, yet, or so. So it can be joined by these words. These are coordinating conjunctions, or, and remember it has to have a comma before the coordinating conjunction, or joined by a semicolon. So that is a compound sentence. It's when you have two sentences and you link them together either with one of these words, fanboys, remember, will help us remember this, for, and, nor, but, or, yet, so, or a semicolon. Then we get into something a little more complex. Complex sentences. Complex sentences have one independent and one or more, you can have more, one or more dependent clauses. And we're going to talk right now a little more about dependent clauses to help you guys understand that. Before I go on to do that, I want to add in the compound complex sentences, but we're not going to talk too much about that right now. I just want you to know that that is when you have basically a compound sentence, so two independent clauses, plus a complex. So it's sort of like a combination. It's not really a separate compound sentence plus a separate complex sentence. It's two independent clauses plus one or more dependent. Two independent and one or more dependent. So it's like when you have a compound sentence and you tack on at least one dependent clause. That's what makes it compound complex. So we're going to talk for just a minute about some of those dependent clauses and complex sentences. Let me say though, guys, the reason that I want you to know this is right now mostly so that like when you see a complex sentence, you won't think that it's a run-on sentence, because remember, a run-on sentence is when you string two independent clauses together. Basically, when you run two complete sentences together without either putting a comma and a conjunction to make it compound or a semicolon. I don't want you to confuse complex sentences with run-on sentences right now. That's really why we're doing this. And also I want you to know that you put a comma after an introductory dependent clause in a complex sentence. So we are going to go over this more later. This is just the beginning. So be patient with yourself as you're learning this. All right, so let's talk about some of the coordinating conjunctions that you may see in dependent clauses in complex sentences. So let me find that here. Guys, okay, there it is. Okay, so you got a handout last week that said words that begin subordinate or dependent clauses, and it gives you some of the subordinating conjunctions that begin dependent clauses, like after. So I can say after, I can write the sentence, after I read, comma, because we put a comma after an introductory dependent clause, I go to bed. There's a complex sentence. We've got one independent clause and one dependent clause. So one independent and one dependent. After I read is a dependent clause. It cannot stand alone. If we just have that written like that, after I read, it's a sentence fragment, isn't it? It's a dependent clause. Dependent clause cannot stand alone. So it depends on this to make a complete sentence. It depends on the independent clause to make a complete sentence. When we put it with an independent clause, then it becomes what's called a complex sentence, and we're going to put a comma after an introductory dependent clause. Now, if I say, I go to bed after I read, no comma needed there. The comma only goes after an introductory dependent clause. You can hear the difference when you read the sentence. You sort of pause after the introductory dependent clause. After I read, I go to bed. You can tell that comma is going to go there. You don't pause here. I go to bed after I read. Okay, so look for these subordinating conjunctions. Familiarize yourself with these subordinating conjunctions. After, although, as, because, and you have a handout that has all these listed. Before, if, since, so that, than, though, unless, until, when, whenever, where, whereas, while, how. And then there are some that are two words combined. As if, as long as, or three words combined. As much as soon as though, even if. So when you see those can be a sign that you're going to have a complex sentence. Those are sort of the words that help the clause attach and make sense with the rest of the sentence. Relative pronouns like that, which, who, whom, whoever, whomever, whose can also start dependent or subordinate clauses. So right now, really, what I want you to remember is that you put a comma after an introductory dependent clause. And we will keep working on it. We will move back to it. So this week, when you are writing your essay, this week, then I put on your essay checklist to make sure that you put commas after your introductory dependent clauses, and to make sure that you put commas before your conjunctions when they're joining two sentences into a compound sentence. I just want you to do your best with that. Don't overanalyze it to the point that you're making that the focus of your essay, or every sentence you write, you're worried about whether you punctuate it correctly or not. I just want you to start thinking about it a little bit. Really, the main point of your essay is still what you have to say. And you are all doing a wonderful job saying what you have to say and saying it well. So don't let this lesson on punctuation stop you from doing that. Don't stop and overanalyze it and worry about it. Just do your best. When you notice that you're writing a complex sentence and you notice that you've got an introductory dependent clause that begins with a word like after or when, then put your comma after your introductory dependent clause. And we'll continue to work more on that. All right, the very last thing that I have in this video is I wanted to point out to you that on your homework sheet this week, and I'm going to also tell your parents this in an email, but first of all, I want you to skip the your sentences worksheet. Don't worry about that. We're going to worry about that later. We're going to do that later. I don't want you to do that right now. Don't do that, your sentences worksheet. But on the other worksheet, the one that says commas in compound and complex sentences, where you're going through and writing whether the sentence is compound or complex and putting a comma after an introductory dependent clause or putting a comma before a conjunction to join two sentences into a compound sentence. I want you to look at that for a minute. If you need to pause the video to find it, go ahead and do that. Find your sheet that says commas in compound and complex sentences. Okay, so you should have that worksheet out that says commas in compound and complex sentences. We did the examples together, but I realized when I was looking at that, I made a mistake on one of those examples. So look at number 2, where it says they don't have the book that we need, so let's go to the library. They don't have the book that we need, so let's go to the library. We said that that was a complex sentence. That's actually a type of sentence that is not even listed in your instructions, because look, we have they don't have the book is an independent clause, and then that we need is another dependent clause, and then let's go to the library is an independent clause joined by a conjunction so actually that ends up that was a compound complex sentence. I did not mean to put that on there. That's not even a choice on there, but when I saw that, I didn't want to confuse you. So just you can just write out to the side CDCX, but understand that the other sentences on that sheet will all either be compound or complex. The other ones will not be one of those choices. So just do your best on that worksheet, and we will go over it the next time that we meet. All right. Thank you guys. You guys are doing a really great job on all this. You've learned a lot, and I can see that you're working hard and learning a lot.